In the forgotten corners of Asia, where lanterns still burn for the dead, where rice fields whisper secrets to the wind, and where the blood of ancestors stains the soil beneath our feet, there are stories we do not tell out loud. Stories sealed behind prayer scrolls, buried in unmarked graves, passed down in broken lullabies and silent rituals. Here, curses are not myths, and ghosts are not symbols. They are bound to wedding combs, mirrors, and red-threaded dolls. They wait, they remember, and they never forgive. Welcome to FolkFear, where the veil between the living and the dead is paper-thin. Each tale you'll hear is rooted in real rural superstitions, ancestral rites, and traditions we were warned never to break. But tonight, we break them anyway. So close your doors, blow out the lanterns, and whatever you do, don't answer when the bride knocks. This is FolkFear, and tonight, the story begins. The first time Dewey Lou saw the red lantern on the river, it was just past midnight. The mist rolled down from the forest like a living thing, curling around the riverbanks, smothering the sound of crickets. The moon hung pale and still above the trees, a thin slice of bone in a starless sky. Everything felt too quiet, too empty. Săn Địa village had always been strange like that. Quiet in the wrong places, silent at the wrong times. Dewey stood on the rickety old bridge just beyond the rice paddies, a suitcase by his feet, a phone with no signal in his hand, and the sour taste of homecoming lingering at the back of his throat. It had been over 20 years since he'd left for the city, left this village of ghost stories and candlelit rituals, of whispered names and offerings at crossroads. He had never planned to return, but death had called him back. His father's funeral had been that morning, fast, plain. No monks, no chants, no incense trails winding upward. Just dirt and rope, lowered into a grave that had already been waiting for years. The villagers said little. They kept their eyes low, especially the elders, especially the ones who still remember what the Lou family once did. Now only Dewey remained, and the river remembered. He saw it before he heard it, a soft flicker of crimson light gently gliding over the water's black surface. It bobbed without a current. The air around it shimmered. A lantern, square and ancient in style, made of red silk stretched over thin bamboo ribs, floated upright as if carried by invisible hands. Dewey blinked once, twice. It was still there. The red glow deepened, casting long shadows against the reeds. Beneath it, the reflection didn't ripple like the rest of the river. It was still, solid, unmoving. Then he noticed something else. The lantern wasn't alone. There was a figure behind it, faint, barely visible, draped in red. A woman, or something shaped like one, standing knee-deep in the water, her face completely obscured by a bridal veil. Her hands, bone pale, soaked and stiff, cradled the base of the lantern. She did not move. She did not breathe. And neither did Dewey. The world felt suspended. His chest tightened, heartbeat frozen somewhere between a memory and a scream. The figure tilted her head slightly, as if listening. And then, she began to glide toward the bridge. Dewey staggered back, tripping over his suitcase, falling hard against the wooden planks. The light flickered. A low hum like wind through reeds, or a long exhale from deep within the earth, rose around him. He scrambled upright, clutching the railing, trying to find her again. But she was gone. The river was empty. No lantern, no figure, no ripples, as if the water had swallowed it whole. Silence returned, except for one thing: a comb, lying at the edge of the bridge, small, carved from bone. Its teeth were broken, and its body was stained with red threads, threads that pulsed faintly like veins. Dewey didn't touch it. He couldn't. He told no one. Not the innkeeper woman who served him plain rice and pickled cabbage, not the cousin who offered him a ride but refused to cross the bridge, not even the village elder who sat motionless in the shadow of the banyan tree, his eyes clouded but always watching. Because deep down, Dewey remembered. He remembered his mother waking up screaming on the 7th night of the Ghost Festival when he was 10. He remembered his grandfather slicing a chicken's neck and smearing blood across the doorframe. He remembered the lanterns, red, always red, carried down the river in silence. And he remembered what they said about the Liu family. The river doesn't forget a broken promise. But Dewey had long stopped believing in village curses. He was a literature teacher now, rational, educated, modern. He chalked it up to grief, to sleepless nights, to jet lag and incense smoke. And yet that night, when he closed the windows of the ancestral home and pulled the blanket up over his shoulders, he heard the gentle splash of water just outside. A rhythmic sound, as if something or someone was walking through the river, dragging fabric behind them. In the morning, he found muddy footprints leading from the bridge to his door, and the comb was on his windowsill, still damp, still red. The village remained indifferent. Children played with spinning tops in the dust. Farmers carried bundles of rice stalks. A dog barked at a passing motorbike. The world moved on, but Dewey could feel the silence beneath it all, like a mouth holding back words. He visited his father's grave before sunset. It was a simple headstone, marked with old characters barely visible now. Someone had placed joss sticks there recently, but Dewey hadn't lit them. Someone else had. He turned to leave, but an old woman blocked his path. She wore the ceremonial black scarf of a widow, her face creased like paper folded too many times. Her eyes were not kind, not curious. They held something heavier. "You saw her, didn't you?" she rasped. Dewey's blood ran cold. "Who?" Her gaze fell to his chest. "The one who waits in the river." He didn't reply, couldn't. The woman took a step forward. Her breath smelled of betel nut and ash. "You are the last Liu, the last son. You will marry her, like your father did, like his father did before him." Dewey felt the air tighten around him. That's not real." Her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. Her nails dug into his skin. "Break the ritual, and you break the seal. She is no longer bound." Dewey yanked his arm free. "I don't believe in this." The old woman gave a hollow laugh. "She doesn't care if you believe. She only cares if you forget." And with that, she turned and vanished into the cemetery's far side, swallowed by the banyan shadows. That night, Dewey locked the doors and stuffed a towel beneath the window. But he still heard the splash, still smelled wet earth, still felt the comb beneath his pillow in the morning. Only this time the red threads had grown longer and were braided into the shape of a bridal knot. The ancestral home sat on a slope at the far edge of Săn Địa village, where the forest crept close and the wind never felt warm. The roof tiles had warped with age. Mold crept across the stone walls. Wooden shutters groaned even when closed. Everything smelled faintly of rain-soaked incense, as if the house was still breathing the prayers of people long gone. Dui Liu stood at the threshold with a heavy heart and a deeper unease. He had returned only for the funeral, but something about the air in the village made it feel as though he was stepping into something older than memory, older than blood. His father's house hadn't changed, neither had the silence that clung to it. The villagers said little about the Liu family, and always said it too quietly. The name had become a shadow, spoken only behind closed doors, followed by a gesture of protection or a hasty step away. But he knew why. It was never spoken clearly, not even by his parents, but it was always there, lingering in the way they avoided mirrors during the 7th month, in the way his father would burn paper shoes and red thread and bury them beneath the house. A legacy not of pride, but of debt. A bloodline burdened with something ancient, something unfinished. And now, with his father gone, Dui was the only one left. The first night after the funeral, Dui sat at the altar of the ancestors. The room was dim, lit only by 3 sticks of incense and the fading sun filtering through torn curtains. On the altar were names, wooden plaques carved with calligraphy, lined in neat rows, silent witnesses to centuries of memory. His father's tablet was the newest addition. He bowed 3 times, as was expected, not out of belief, but out of respect, or perhaps fear. A gust of wind slipped under the door, extinguishing the incense. Just like that. No sound, no warning. Dui stared at the smoke curling into nothing. The silence afterward was thick, like water pressing against his ears. And then, a soft clink. He looked down. There, beside the altar, something had rolled from beneath the wooden base. A small object, pale, ridged, almost bone-like. A comb. Not a plastic one, not wood. It was ivory, or something that looked like it. Its edges were worn, but it held the unmistakable shape of a bridal hair comb, the kind used in ceremonial dress, carved with lotus motifs and symbols of union. Dui didn't want to touch it. He felt, without knowing how, that it had been waiting for him. The next morning, he visited the village elder. Elder Bui was nearly 90, blind in one eye, and said to remember every burial in Săn Địa for the last 70 years. He had been there when Dui was a child. He had been there at his grandfather's death. And now he sat in the sun-drenched courtyard of the temple, his lips pressed thin and his gaze fixed on nothing. Dui kneeled respectfully. "I found something," he said, placing the comb on a red cloth between them. Elder Bui did not look. He didn't need to. "It's hers," he said softly. "It always finds its way back." Dui felt the chill ripple down his spine. "Whose?" But the elder ignored the question. "You are the last Liu. Do you know what that means?" Dui hesitated. "It means I have no more uncles or brothers." "No, it means there is no one left to carry the debt but you." The words settled like dust in a crypt. "What debt?" The elder finally looked at him. One milky eye, one black and sharp. "The bride." Her name, Dui learned, had been Tao Ling. She was a village girl, long dead. No photos, no family lines, erased from the records. But her story remained, whispered in pieces, told by candlelight, or carried on the backs of river wind. She had been promised in marriage to a Liu son 2 centuries ago, not for love, but for land. The elder told the story slowly, voice shaking with memory or fear. The old Liu patriarch wanted a bridge, a patch of rice land that belonged to her father. He promised her hand to his youngest son, barely 12. The deal was sealed. But when the son died of fever, the patriarch still demanded the marriage take place. Dewey felt his throat tighten. But how? A ghost marriage, elder boy whispered. She was forced into a red dress, bound in incense smoke, buried beside the dead boy, alive. Dewey recoiled. That's a sin, the elder agreed. One sealed by ritual, one never forgiven. They had offered her to the spirit realm to seal the pact, to quiet her rage, but something had gone wrong. The marriage had not been accepted by the dead. Her soul was trapped, not in the afterlife, but in the land, in the river, in the house. She was buried with a comb, the elder said, the object of binding. She is tied to it, to the Liu bloodline. Every generation, the last son must take her hand in ritual, or she comes back. Dewey stood up abruptly. This is madness! The elder did not flinch. Madness that still breathes. He pointed to the comb. You cannot destroy it. You cannot bury it. It always returns. Dewey left the temple with the weight of 1,000 years pressing on his shoulders. He returned to the house, locked the comb in a drawer, and tried not to think about it. But that night, the dreams began. Not of faces, but of red cloth, of rivers flowing backward, of a voice calling through the floorboards, soft and sorrowful. Finish what was promised. He awoke with sweat clinging to his skin, and the comb on his pillow, still damp, still warm, still waiting. The next morning he found old family records in the chest beneath the altar. Stacked scrolls, brittle paper, seals of black ink and ancestral crests. Among them was a bundle wrapped in silk, faded red with burn marks. Inside was a wedding contract, written in classical script, dated to the 8th year of Emperor Tuduk's reign. It was signed by the Liu patriarch, and beneath it a thumbprint in blood. The name of the bride, Tao Ling. It was not a legend. It was a record. Dewey sat for hours staring at the document. It felt wrong to be real, wrong to exist, and yet it explained everything. The rituals, the village silence, the generations of Liu sons who had died young if they refused to marry. He thought of his uncle, the one who died in Saigon in a car accident after renouncing the family. He thought of his older brother, drowned when he was 5. He thought of his father, who never spoke of dreams, but always burned offerings. None of them escaped. And now, he was alone. He walked down to the river that evening. The same bridge, the same silence. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows, he saw it again. A red lantern, flickering, faintly, floating towards him. And this time, he did not run. The house had grown colder, not with the chill of wind or storm, but something still, a quiet that sucked the warmth out of the walls, that made Duilu's breath mist even when the sun rose outside. He had stopped opening the windows. The air felt wrong, like breathing in the smell of grave dirt. The comb was no longer hiding. It waited on surfaces he hadn't touched, on the table beside his bowl of rice, on the altar shelf between incense sticks. Once, tucked into the folded towel in the bathing basin, as though it had been combing through water, waiting for him to notice. Always damp, always warm, as if freshly pulled from a body that had never stopped bleeding. Dewey tried to ignore it. For 3 days he refused to touch it, even with gloves, but it would reappear wherever he went. When he left the house, it would be gone, but by nightfall it returned as faithful as a shadow. On the 4th night, he gave in, not with his hands, but with his eyes. He sat before it, candle lit, and stared. It wasn't just a comb. Up close, it was carved with a bridal motif. The lotus pattern was clear now, wrapped around the edges like a crown. But in the right light, another shape revealed itself beneath the floral lines, etched so faintly it was barely there. A face. No, half a face. A woman's profile, mouth sealed shut, eyes open too wide. He recoiled. It wasn't an ornament. It was a binding. Dewey returned to the ancestral shrine the next morning, not to pray, but to search. The altar sat heavy with dust and silence. He had dusted it days before, but now it looked as though years had passed. He wiped it clean again, lit incense not out of devotion, but instinct. The smoke rose strangely, curling in a spiral, then coiling inward like a snake eating its tail. He placed the comb on the altar's base. The incense flared, and from within the baseboard, a hollow knock. He froze. 3 taps, then silence. There was something beneath the shrine. He pulled it aside, hands trembling. The wood groaned. Beneath it, buried in the dirt foundation, was a shallow cavity lined with red cloth, wax seals, and broken talismans. At the center sat a small lacquered box, black with gold etching dulled by time. Inside he found records, yellowing pages wrapped in oilcloth, a string of beads, and a scroll, charred along the edges. And beneath them all, another comb, identical, but this one was cracked down the middle. He touched it. Pain bloomed in his palm. He gasped, jerking back. Blood welled where the comb had split right across the middle of his palm, as if something had slashed it with precision. He wrapped it in cloth and shoved it back into the box. The shrine trembled. Dust spilled from the rafters. The incense snapped in half. And the house whispered, not with words, but with the rustle of fabric, a red veil brushing over wood, a breath behind his ear, a soft, wet sigh. He did not turn. He fled. At the temple, Elder Bowie was already waiting. "You opened it," the old man said, not unkindly. "The shrine remembers." Dewey laid the scroll before him. "What is this?" The elder did not touch it. He only bowed his head. The record of the Taoist. Dewey blinked. "What Taoist?" The older's voice lowered, as if afraid something else might hear it. "The one who tried to unbind her." The story spilled slowly. Decades ago, during the French occupation, a Taoist priest had come to Săn Địa. He was known for sealing spirits, purifying cursed wells, and banishing bride ghosts, the kind who return to claim grooms from the living. The Louis family, desperate to break the ritual, hired him in secret. He performed rites over 3 nights, chanted scriptures, buried the comb in ash, tore down the wedding altar, and burned ancestral records. On the final night, he sealed the object with blood, locked it beneath the shrine, and declared the ritual broken. The next morning, he was gone. They found his body in the banyan tree, skin stripped from head to toe, his eyes gouged out, his hands folded in prayer. His tongue had been bitten off. The villagers refused to speak of it again. But the house had changed after that. The haunting slowed. The lantern did not appear for a generation. The village breathed. Until now. Dewey unwrapped his palm that evening. The cut from the cracked comb had grown black around the edges, not like infection, but like ink. Lines spread outward, branching like roots, veins that pulsed not with blood, but something older. He could feel her, even awake. The comb sang now, faintly, when he stood too close, a hum at the edge of hearing, like teeth chattering in cold wind. It responded to his thoughts. When he dreamed of throwing it away, it reappeared on his chest. He considered burning it, but he remembered the Taoist and the banyan tree, and the fact that the comb never left on its own. That night he returned the comb to the shrine, set it gently in the cavity. He lit 2 red candles instead of 3, burned a single strip of joss paper, and whispered a name he hadn't meant to remember. Tao Ling. The wind stopped, and the shrine breathed. A groan from within the wood, a crack down the frame, and a voice, so soft it could have been air, but it wasn't. I waited. He stayed awake until dawn, but nothing else came. No footsteps, no cold breath on the back of his neck, no veil brushing against the walls. Only stillness, the kind that comes before something wakes. And when he rose to wash his face, he saw her reflection in the mirror, just for a moment, behind him. A girl in red, veil over her face, holding the comb. Dewey no longer slept through the night. He tried. He lay in the ancestral bed, beneath a mosquito net that felt more like a shroud than a shelter, listening to the house breathe around him. The walls groaned, the rafters whispered. Somewhere above, something moved that didn't walk like rats. But it was always the river he heard first, splashing that echoed faintly through the dark, slow, rhythmic, like a woman wading through water with heavy robes. And now she came in dreams. Red veils, mouth sewn shut, fingers blackened with soil, and a wedding comb dragged through her hair, even as maggots slipped from her scalp. Every night she came closer. Every morning the comb was back. It was the village midwife who finally spoke the truth. Her name was Me Tam, widowed, nearly deaf, and known for bringing more babies into the world than anyone else alive in Săn Địa. She lived in a stilted wooden house by the stream, surrounded by jars of dried herbs and faded talismans. Dewey found her hunched over a bundle of herbs, drying them in the sun. He didn't have to explain why he came. She only looked up and said, "So, the bride has returned." He sat beside her, the shame of knowing nothing, of being the last, heavy on his shoulders. "Tell me what really happened." She was silent for a long time. Then she pointed to the small red thread wound around her wrist. "We used to wear these to keep her away. Now the young ones laugh at it." Dwi glanced at the thread. "The comb is back." "She always follows the comb," the midwife muttered. "It binds her, like a wedding ring that rots but never breaks." The story had variations, but the core never changed. Long ago, the Liu family was wealthy, landowners, ritual keepers, and during a particularly hard season, blighted crops, dead sons, and restless ancestors, they sought favor with the spirit world. They arranged a marriage between their youngest dead son and a living girl, Tao Ling, the daughter of a poor farmer who owed them grain. The promise was made in secret, a bride for the spirit world. The girl's parents begged, but the contract was signed. On the 7th night of the Hungry Ghost Festival, she was dressed in ceremonial red, fed wine mixed with nightshade, and laid beside the empty coffin of the dead boy. Only she didn't die. She woke inside the coffin, screaming beneath layers of soil, but by then, she was already buried. She was not given the proper rites, Mu Tom said. The ancestors rejected the offering, but her spirit did not leave. Dwi swallowed. "So she cursed the bloodline?" "No," the midwife corrected. "She became part of it." He stared at her. "She wasn't a ghost," the old woman whispered. "Not at first. She was a wife, a wronged wife, buried without consent. That kind of spirit doesn't haunt. She binds. She latches to the blood that wronged her, follows it through generations." Dwi felt sick. "Then why keep marrying her?" "Because we made the pact, and breaking a pact with the spirit world is worse than death." The ritual had become a cycle. Each generation, when the last male heir reached adulthood, he was required to perform a shadow wedding, a symbolic marriage to appease the spirit, a doll groom, burned offerings, sometimes an animal sacrifice. It kept her quiet. It kept her from waking. But Dwi's father, he had failed to complete it before his death, and now the debt was Dwi's. He left the midwife's house with more questions than answers. His hands trembled as he walked. The trees along the dirt road leaned strangely inward, as if listening. The sky above Săn Địa looked too low, like it was pressing down on the rooftops. There were no birds, only the distant cough of wind and the river. That night he returned to the family altar again. He brought the comb. This time he placed it on a tray of offerings, paper shoes, red thread, dried lotus seeds. He lit the incense. He burned the contract. He waited. Nothing happened. No breath, no footsteps, no bride. Until midnight. The air turned sour. The walls creaked, and the mirror beside the altar clouded, fog rising on the inside of the glass. Dwi leaned forward, and in the reflection, the red veil parted. Only for a second, enough for him to see her. She had no lips, only stitches, blackened thread sewn tight from cheek to cheek. Her skin was cracked like ceramic. Her eyes, wide and wrong, looked into his face, not through it, as if she saw not just his face, but the blood behind it. She raised her hand and pointed to his chest. He woke up on the floor. The mirror shattered, and the comb, now splintered into 3 pieces, sat in a bowl of dried rice. The rice was soaked red. He tried to leave the village the next day, packed a bag, booked a car, even walked halfway down the road toward the highway. But the driver never came, and the villagers refused to meet his eyes. "Where are you going?" a child asked, watching from a porch. "Back to the city," he replied. The boy tilted his head. "But the bride hasn't chosen her husband yet." Dwi left anyway. By sunset, he was back in Săn Địa, lost, as if the road had folded back on itself. That night, the river lantern returned, this time closer. It hovered just outside the gate. Behind it, she stood ankle-deep in water, veil fluttering, hair dripping with soil. She lifted her hand again, and in her palm, the wedding comb, whole, waiting. The house no longer felt like it belonged to the living. Each step Dwi took echoed too loudly, like he was walking inside a hollowed-out body. The wooden floor seemed to breathe beneath him, groaning when he moved, whispering when he stood still. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and burnt rice. Somewhere in the walls, something scratched faintly, like a fingernail dragging across wood. He knew she was near, not in form, but in memory, in presence. The red bride no longer needed to show herself. She was beneath everything now, the walls, the ground, the family name. And still, the comb had returned, whole, gleaming, warm, waiting beside his pillow. He needed answers, not from stories, but from what had been buried. He returned to the shrine, not to pray, but to tear it open. He dismantled the altar shelf slowly, hands shaking. He lifted the lacquer box buried beneath the baseboard, where the cracked comb had once been stored, and sifted through the scrolls and oilcloth-wrapped items inside. Among them, he found something he had missed before. A scroll, but unlike the others, older, burnt at the edges, and sealed with a red wax mark, cracked now, as if broken by time or force. A Taoist seal, but not for protection, for binding. Dwi unrolled the scroll on the altar floor, the brittle paper trembling in his hands. Symbols danced across it, drawn in black and red with jagged strokes that bled beyond the edges. It was not written like scripture. It felt like a warning. The ink smelled faintly of copper. Beneath the characters, diagrams, circles within circles, a wedding comb placed at the center, surrounded by 6 gates, 8 trigrams, and in the margin, "Do not break the comb." The same warning had been etched repeatedly in various dialects, Han script, Chu Nom, even simplified modern characters added later. And beneath them all, the signature of the Taoist priest, Tai Kung. Dwi searched the scroll line by line. The words blurred, but one line stood out again and again, repeated like a litany. Binding a spirit through blood marriage is to summon her with obligation. She cannot ascend, she cannot forget, and she cannot forgive. Another note, scribbled in the priest's hand. She is not merely a ghost, she is wrath without exit. And finally, a chilling passage near the end. The pact cannot be broken by fire, not by severing the comb, not by fleeing the land. The blood must choose, or she will choose for it. The door behind him creaked, not from wind, but as if something had just stepped in. He turned. No one. But the temperature had dropped. His breath misted, and the comb, still lying beside the scroll, began to vibrate softly. The teeth clattered against the wood. Dewey backed away. The scroll darkened before his eyes as if ink was bleeding upward from within the paper. The trigrams warped, the binding circle cracked. A single word burned through the center. Oathbreaker. He fled the altar room and locked the door behind him. But that night, the dreams were worse. He dreamed of the priest, naked, strung upside down from the branches of the banyan tree, skin peeled away like wet parchment, mouth gaping in a scream without sound. Beneath him, the red bride waited, holding the comb in both hands, hair crawling with centipedes, veil soaked in blood. She raised the comb and drove it into the priest's chest. Dewey woke screaming. His chest burned. He tore open his shirt and found 3 red lines scored into his skin, just beneath his collarbone, perfectly parallel, like the marks of a comb dragged through flesh. He stumbled to the mirror, and in the fogged surface, she waited again. Closer now. Her mouth was still sewn shut, but her eyes were weeping blood. The next day, Dewey went to the village cemetery. He needed to find the priest's grave, but there wasn't one. No marker, no stone. Just an unkempt patch beneath the banyan tree, its branches reaching out like fingers, its roots choking the ground. The midwife found him there. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Tell me what happened to him," Dewey demanded. She looked away. "They buried his bones in silence. No rites, no name. Why? Because he tried to sever a woman from her wedding." The wind howled suddenly, sharp, sudden, bitter. The red string around the midwife's wrist snapped. Her eyes widened. "The seal is broken," she whispered. That evening, Dewey tried to burn the scroll. He lit it in the hearth, watched it curl. But the flame died. The scroll remained, untouched, as if fire refused to touch what belonged to the dead. The next time he unrolled it, new words had appeared, written in blood, not ink. One more night, one more offering, or the marriage begins. And beneath it, his name, Lu Dewey. On the 7th night of the Hungry Ghost Festival, the wind stopped. The village of Săn Địa, usually noisy with dogs barking and roosters crying even in the dark, fell into an unnatural silence. The air felt thick, like water waiting to boil. The lanterns that usually lined doorways were gone this year. The villagers had not dared to hang them. Even the rice fields seemed to hold their breath. Dewey sat alone in the ancestral home, each candle burning low. The shrine room was sealed. The comb was locked in a box, which he had chained shut with a belt. And still, something pressed against the edge of his thoughts, a presence, soft but insistent, like water dripping endlessly in a sealed room. He had tried to keep her away. He had followed every ritual he could find, burnt incense, read the Taoist scroll aloud under a blood moon, even buried the comb wrapped in red silk beneath a Bodhi tree. But she was coming, and he knew it. It started with the water. At exactly midnight, the house grew damp, not with rain, not with fog, with river water. It dripped from the ceiling, collected in the corners of the floor, leaked from beneath the locked shrine door, and it smelled of wet earth and forgotten graves. Then came the sound, the clink of porcelain bowls on wood, the scrape of sandals over stone, the rustle of wedding silk, and finally, the whisper of her veil brushing against the doorframe. He did not open the door, but it did not matter. The air in the room thickened. The candles dimmed until they drowned themselves in their own wax. And from the far wall, the mirror began to bleed. It wasn't blood, exactly. It was black, viscous, oozing down from the corners of the frame like ink spilled from an unseen wound. And then the reflection changed, no longer showing the room, but a corridor, a hallway Dwi did not recognize, lit by paper lanterns. And at the end of it, she floated forward. She didn't walk. Her feet did not touch the ground. She moved as if pulled by unseen strings, the red veil flowing around her, soaked at the ends, trailing behind her like a bridal train pulled from the bottom of a grave. And in her hands, the comb, no longer broken, polished, fresh, and inlaid with gold filigree that pulsed like a heartbeat. She stopped at the mirror and tilted her head. The veil rippled slightly, and beneath it, the hint of her mouth, still sewn shut, but smiling. Dwi stumbled back, heart racing, bile rising in his throat. The mirror shattered. The sound echoed through the house like a scream. The glass flew in all directions, and the comb was suddenly in the center of the room, resting on the floor, pristine and still warm to the touch. It had returned. Again. He ran, out of the house, out into the night air. But Săn Địa had changed. The village was cloaked in red mist, not fog, mist, like smoke trailing from unseen incense burners. The air was thick with the scent of old sandalwood, of rotting flowers, and the faint sweetness of ceremonial wine. At the riverbank, he stopped and saw her. She floated across the water, not walking, not rowing, but gliding. The red lantern drifted before her, its glow casting strange, long shadows across the river like tendrils reaching for the shore. And behind her, the water bubbled, as if something else was rising beneath her. She stopped at the edge. Her veil dripped, and her hand, white, bone-thin, trembling, extended toward him. In her palm, the comb. "You must not take it," a voice rasped behind him. Dwi turned. It was Elder Bui, pale, barefoot, standing at the river's edge in his ceremonial robes. "You are the last son, and she has waited long enough. She's not just a spirit. No, she is a bride, and she was never given her wedding night." Dwi backed away. "I never agreed to this. Your blood did. She was buried alive, and now she lives through you." The elder's eyes gleamed. "You cannot unmake what your ancestor bound. You can only obey or perish." Dwi turned back to the river. The bride was closer now. The lantern floated at his feet, and beneath it, his own reflection, wearing red. He ran, back to the house, but he didn't make it far, because the ground beneath him gave way, soft, as if dug up just moments ago. He fell knee-deep into damp earth, and there, beneath his feet, something moved. Hands, fingers, dozens of them, reaching up, grasping, pulling. The buried hands of other sons, the ones who failed, the ones who fled, now part of the soil, bound to her forever. He screamed and clawed his way out, mud caking his skin, nails torn. When he reached the front steps of the house, the door was already open. Candles had been lit, red ones, and on the table, a wedding feast, laid out with bone china, cold rice, dead fish, rotten eggs, all an ancestral offering. And at the head of the table, a straw doll, wearing his clothes, his face, and a wedding ring carved from ash. He had tried to escape the ritual, but she had performed it anyway, without him, with what remained of him. In that moment, Dewey understood. She no longer needed his consent. She only needed his name and his blood. The next morning, the house was dry again. No water, no footprints, no broken glass, only silence. And the comb, now placed neatly on the pillow beside Dew, as though it had slept there through the night. He didn't scream this time. He didn't move. He only stared at the red thread now coiled around its teeth, braided, knotted, binding. The knot was a wedding knot, and he hadn't tied it. Dew moved like a man condemned, the hours blurring as he scrubbed at his skin, packed his things, and burned more incense in a desperate, silent plea to anything that might be listening. But the spirits were already watching. That night, he did what he had sworn he never would. He gave her the ritual, a false one. In the back room, he built the wedding altar from scraps, red cloth for the backdrop, faded candles from the family drawer, a ceramic bowl filled with ash and salt. And then he made the groom, a straw figure, roughly human, dressed in his clothes, stuffed with paper prayers and tied with red string around the wrists and ankles. He carved his name onto a slip of paper and placed it inside the figure's chest, right above the heart. It felt wrong, but he didn't stop. He placed the comb in the doll's hand and lit the incense, 1 stick, not 3, and whispered the words he remembered from childhood ceremonies, words of union, of ancestral acknowledgement, of offerings to the unseen. And then he burned the straw groom, all of it. Let it turn to smoke and ash. Let the comb melt. Let the spirit believe he had fulfilled the vow. He watched the fire for a long time, watched the comb blacken, watched the straw curl, watched the wedding knot dissolve. And then he slept, for the first time in nights. At dawn, he awoke to birdsong. No dripping, no mirror fog, no footsteps, just light. For a moment, he believed it had worked, until he opened the door. The altar room was untouched, no ash, no scorch marks, no smell of smoke, and on the table, the straw groom, whole, standing, facing him, and in its chest, where he had placed the slip of paper, his name was gone, replaced with another, Thao Ling. He staggered backward, breath caught in his throat, and that's when he heard the laughter, soft, wet, like breath through earth. It came from beneath the floorboards. It came from the walls. It came from the shrine, mocking, gentle, forgiving until it wasn't. The mirror in the hallway cracked. The glass split in a spiral, and Dew's reflection smiled without him.
Its lips moved, but no sound came. He leaned in, and this time the mouth said the words clearly. "You broke your vow." That night, the dreams returned. He stood at an altar in the forest, surrounded by shadows in red robes. He wore a red silk tunic, a wedding crown of twisted iron, and beside him stood the bride, still veiled, still silent, but this time closer. She reached for his hand. Her fingers were cold. She led him to a room made of mirrors, dozens of them, all showing his death, drowning, hanging, choking on red threads, and in each one the comb pierced into his heart. He awoke choking, thread caught in his throat, not imagined, real, red string pulled from his mouth like a magician's scarf, endless, tangled, wet with saliva. He vomited it onto the floor. It slithered like something alive, and then stopped, perfectly knotted at the end, into a bridal knot. By the next morning, the villagers knew. They did not come near him. Children were pulled indoors. Shrines were resealed. Even the dogs stopped barking at the house because they knew what he had done. He had faked the vow, desecrated the pact, mocked the spirit, and now she was unbound. Not tricked, not appeased, but awakened. The midwife came to him that evening. She said nothing for a long time, then placed a cup of salt water in his hands. "Drink it," she said, "so she cannot follow you into your mouth again." He drank it, and she spoke. "You thought the ritual was about the act," she whispered. "It was about the intention, the blood, the fear, the surrender. You gave her none of those things." "She's not human," Du said. "No," she replied, "but you made her a bride, and brides remember. Not for days, not for years, but forever."
The dogs were the first to know. The village had many mangy strays that roamed freely, barking at shadows, chasing scooters, or lounging near the banyan tree. They barked at everything. But now, they were silent. They stopped walking past Dewey's house, wouldn't go near the gate. Some lay down at the edge of the property and stared, ears back, tails tucked, eyes fixed on something the humans could not see. One dog, a black mutt missing half its tail, tried to cross the threshold one night. It stepped onto the walkway, paused, then began to whimper. And moments later, it turned and ran, yelping as if burned. That night, it was found dead beneath the bridge, its neck twisted, its eyes missing, its body wet. The villagers said nothing, but they placed salt bowls at their doorsteps, hung wind chimes with red thread above their porches, and began to close their windows before sunset. Dewey hadn't left the house in days. He barely ate. He didn't sleep. The comb had returned again, placed in the soup bowl he hadn't touched, nestled gently on a bed of jasmine rice. He threw it into the river. It floated back to shore. He buried it beneath a stone. The stone cracked in half. He tried burning it again, but the fire wouldn't catch. That night, he woke with it clenched in his hand, gripping so tightly that the teeth had punctured his palm. The blood soaked through the sheets and spelled her name. He began to see her in places no one else did. At the foot of the bed, standing still, the veil swaying slightly as if underwater. In the reflection of the rice pot lid, behind him, even though no one stood there when he turned. In the window across from the shrine, even though it looked out into an alley. Always veiled, always silent, always watching. The house began to rot. Slowly at first. The wood walls darkened, streaked with moisture that couldn't be dried. The floorboards warped with dampness, creaking like ribs under pressure. The altar grew moss, no matter how often he scrubbed it. The air inside thickened, filled with the smell of river clay, old incense, and something worse. Something like rotting silk. Then the insects came. Tiny red centipedes that wriggled through the cracks in the floor. Pale spiders that crawled across the mirror. Beetles that nested in the pillows. He crushed them. They returned. He sealed the doors. They crawled from beneath the bed. The midwife told him what it meant. "She's building a body," she whispered, "piece by piece, borrowing what she needs from the living world." Doi choked. "For what?" "For the wedding night," she said. He tried sleeping elsewhere, in the temple, at a neighbor's house, but she followed. The incense in the temple turned black when he lit it. The floor of the neighbor's house cracked open at midnight, revealing muddy footprints that led to his bed. He returned home, because he realized there was no escaping her, only delaying. And each day her presence grew stronger. One afternoon, he found a gift on the altar, not placed by him, but laid carefully in the center of the tray, a red veil, fresh, fragrant, damp. And beside it, a severed finger, small, pale, with a wedding band carved of blackened bone. He dropped it. It twitched. He tried pleading, on his knees, before the shrine, burning joss sticks until the smoke made him cough blood. He whispered apologies, offered food, wrote her name with gold ink and set it afloat down the river. Nothing worked. Only the comb remained faithful. Each night it returned, placed with reverence by invisible hands. He spoke to it now, the comb, as if it might answer. Sometimes he swore it pulsed in his palm. Sometimes he thought he heard her breath through it, drawn between the teeth like wind through a flute. One night, he dared ask aloud, "Why me?" And the candle beside him blew out. The silence that followed was worse than any whisper. That night, he dreamed again. He stood in the river, naked, veiled, holding the comb, and behind him the village burned. The dogs howled, but not at him. They howled in mourning, because they knew he had already been chosen.
Dwai had not spoken in days, not because there was no one to talk to, but because every time he opened his mouth, he feared someone else might speak through him, or worse, that she would answer. The dreams no longer waited for sleep. They came in flashes, in the blink between candle flickers, in the shadows between breaths, in the moment just before he turned a corner and saw her vanish. But it was at night, still, that she spoke, and only then. The first whisper came just before dawn. He awoke in the shrine room, arms folded tightly across his chest, seated as if in ritual, though he remembered falling asleep on the floor, far from the altar. Before him, 3 candles had been lit. Their flames danced to a rhythm he couldn't place. The air shimmered with heat, though the night was cold. And then, softly, painfully, he heard her voice, not from across the room, but from within the room, from inside his head. It was not a voice made for speaking. It was wet, earth-choked, dry and splintered like a coffin board. But the words were clear. I waited beneath your name. Dwight clutched his chest. He could feel her in there, like fingers pressed gently behind his ribs, trying not to hurt him, not yet. She came to him fully that night, in a dream too vivid to be a dream. He stood in the old wedding chamber, the one his ancestors once used in their blood-soaked rituals. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one draped with red silk. A table stood in the center, laid with ritual dishes, rice, duck egg, betel leaves, a small cup of rice wine. And beside it, the wedding bed, thin mattress, red canopy, blood-stained sheets, and sitting at the edge of the bed, her. She did not move. She did not speak. Her veil hung over her face, dripping as though soaked in water. But he could feel her eyes beneath it, staring, begging, burning. He opened his mouth to scream, and she raised her hand, one finger, to where her mouth would be, and shook her head slow, deliberate. Don't scream. Dwight couldn't move, his legs locked beneath him. She stood, 1 step, 2, the comb in her hand, held not like a weapon, but like a gift. She placed it in his palm. It was warm, alive, pulsing. Then finally she spoke, not with lips, but through breath, a whisper in the bone marrow. You were promised. I was buried. You forgot. I remember. Her hands reached up to her veil, trembled, and then she lifted it. Dwight wept, not from fear, but from sorrow, because her face wasn't monstrous, it was ruined. The skin was cracked and peeled like old paint, flesh torn from where the stitches had once been. Her lips had never healed, her eyes not angry, but aching, mourning something that never had been hers. Love, life, escape. He reached out despite himself, and she let him touch her face. And then she wept too, black tears that steamed against her cheeks and stained his hands. Let me in, she whispered. One night, one body, one vow. Then I will sleep. He awoke on the floor again, the bed untouched, the candles cold, and in his hand, the comb, no longer dry, but soaked, as if it had been resting in her tears. The midwife came that afternoon, uninvited. She sat with him without speaking, as if knowing, sensing. And finally she said, "You saw her." Dwight nodded. She showed you the wound? Another nod. She asked to be let in? A breath. Yes. The old woman sighed. She doesn't want your death, child. She wants your body to finish the marriage. I thought I already belonged to her. No, she said gently. Not yet. Not until you let her in. Dwy stood and walked to the mirror. It had been covered for weeks. He pulled the red cloth away. His reflection looked thinner, paler, eyes sunken, but it was still him. He raised the comb, stared at it, and asked the question that had been killing him slowly. Will it end if I say yes? The mirror flickered, and the reflection changed. It was still him, but behind his eyes, her.
The banyan tree stood like a sentinel on the southern edge of Săn Địa, its roots thick as limbs, gnarled and blackened, strangling the earth in slow, suffocating coils. No birds nested in its branches. No children played in its shade. Even insects avoided its trunk. The villagers didn't speak of it, but they all walked the long way around. Yui went there alone, because the midwife had whispered to him after the dream, when her hands trembled and her eyes turned glassy. You must see what happened to the last man who said no. He didn't ask which man. He already knew. The Taoist priest, the one who had tried to sever the bride. The path to the tree was overgrown. Vines clawed at his ankles like desperate hands. Flies buzzed thick in the air. And yet, no animal sounds, no frogs, no birdsong. Just the crunch of his feet and the distant whisper of leaves curling in the wind. When he reached the banyan's base, the smell hit him. Not rot, not death. Something older, preserved in pain. There, entangled in the lowest branches, was a shape, suspended, shrouded in vines. At first, Yui thought it was a shrine offering, cloth or clay. But as he stepped closer, he saw the shape of limbs, bent, twisted, folded unnaturally, and skinless. The body hung in prayer position, legs crossed, arms raised, hands pressed together at the chest. But the skin was gone, completely. Muscle tissue exposed, tendons hardened like ropes, the face peeled back in a silent scream, teeth still clenched, eye sockets hollow. Yet the lips still bore the red powder of ceremonial chant. And carved into the chest, as if etched with fingernails, was a warning. Do not break what was promised. Yui stumbled backward, bile rising in his throat. He fell against the roots, gasping for breath, and then he saw the comb, lodged between the body's palms, pressed like a sacred relic, stained, cracked, burned into his sight. He reached up. He shouldn't have, but he did. The moment his fingers brushed the comb, the corpse's mouth twitched, and then its jaw opened, slowly, painfully, until a voice poured out. Not breath, not whisper, but memory. The priest's last chant replaying in reverse. Her name is a wound, her vow is a cage, her touch cannot be undone. The corpse convulsed, and from within its hollow chest,
Dozens of paper wedding slips spilled out, contracts, all bearing the same name, Tao Ling, all signed by blood, all sealed with the mark of the Liu family. And one of them, one fresh, still wet, still warm, bore Yui's name. He dropped the comb and ran. He ran until his legs failed him, ran until the tree disappeared behind the choking vines and the village reappeared like a mirage. And still, in his hand, the paper. No matter how many times he let go, it returned, clinging to his palm like a curse with a signature. Back at the house, the air had shifted. The candles lit themselves. The altar was cleaned. The comb lay across the incense tray, peaceful and reverent. And the mirrors, all uncovered, all glowing faintly red. She had grown stronger. Each denial made her more real. Each refusal deepened her claim. And now, she wasn't just haunting the house. She was inside it. Inside him. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the floor, eyes fixed on the scroll he had retrieved again from the shrine box. It had changed. The diagrams were gone, the words replaced, all of it written in the priest's final scrawl, blood on silk. The bride cannot be severed. She is not seeking justice. She is seeking a groom. You will marry her, you already have. And at the very bottom, a final note. When she whispers, do not answer. That is how she enters. Too late. He had already answered.
The house dressed itself for the wedding. No one entered, no hands moved, but the transformation was unmistakable. Red cloth unfurled over the altar. Candles aligned themselves in neat, perfect rows. Incense lit without flame, curling its smoke like tendrils around the door frames. The comb now sat on a pillow of silk. Above it, the red veil hung, weightless, drifting slightly, even in the still air. And across the floor, footprints, small, bare, damp, leading from the altar to the dining room, and waiting for him. Dwi hadn't spoken all day. His voice was trapped somewhere between dread and resignation. The priest's body haunted his thoughts, swinging gently in the banyan's grip. And the contract, still in his hand no matter how many times he burned it, tore it, drowned it, seemed now etched into his skin. But it was the smell that woke him at dusk. Not rot, not decay, but food. The wedding banquet had been laid. He walked to the dining room, heart hammering so hard it pulsed behind his eyes. There, on the long wooden table, dishes were arranged like a ceremonial offering. Not fresh, not warm, but sculpted. From wax, from bone, from hair. Dishes of blackened rice molded from ash. A whole duck, its feathers still attached, neck twisted, eyes missing. Boiled eggs cracked open, revealing not yolks, but teeth. And at the center, a wedding cake, 3 tiers, iced with mud, decorated with centipedes, topped with 2 straw figurines, one male, one veiled. The male doll wore a tag, Lu Dri. He stepped forward, drawn despite himself. The chairs on either side of the table scraped back, empty, but waiting. He sat, unable to stop his body from obeying. The room dimmed. The air thickened. The veil drifted into the room without wind. And then she arrived. Not through the door, not from the shadows, but from beneath the table. She rose like smoke through the floorboards, her form flickering in and out of solidity. One moment, a woman. The next, a shadow wrapped in red. She took her seat, opposite him, still veiled, still silent, and nodded once. The food began to shift, move, breathe. The rice pulsed, the duck twitched, the cake bled. And behind him voices whispered, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, ghosts, ancestors, unmarried brides, mourning mothers, all chanting the same thing. Accept the vow, accept the bride, accept the fate. She raised her hand, lifted a bone spoon, dipped it into a bowl of black soup, and offered it to him. Not in violence, but tradition, as one would in an actual wedding. The first taste, the joining of two names. Dwi's hands trembled. He felt cold sweat slide down his back. He wanted to scream, to run, but he didn't. He opened his mouth and drank. The soup was not liquid, it was memory. He tasted soil, screams, the inside of a coffin. He saw flashes of her life, brief, brutal, buried. A girl crying behind red curtains, hands forcing her into bridal robes. The lid closing. Darkness, darkness, darkness. When he opened his eyes, she had lifted her veil, and for the first time, he saw her smile. It broke something inside him, not from fear, but from sorrow, because she wasn't smiling with joy. She was smiling like someone finally heard her scream. She reached across the table, touched his cheek. Her hand was wet, and when she pulled it back, his skin came with it, just a piece, enough to stain her fingers. He collapsed, the room spinning, the voices rising. A bell rang in the distance, low, hollow, like the one used in funerals. He heard the midwife's voice echoing from memory. If the wedding is completed, she will never leave. But if it is denied again, no one else in your bloodline will live, and neither will you. The feast faded. The house went dark. And when Dwi awoke, the comb was gone. So was the veil. So was the food. But on the altar sat a small bowl. Inside it, his tooth, one he didn't remember losing, still warm, still bleeding, wrapped in red thread.
There were no dreams that night, only memory. Not his, hers. Dwi awoke with dirt beneath his fingernails. The pillow beneath his head had soaked through, not with sweat, but with muddy water. The sheet smelled of old rice wine, sandalwood, and something metallic. He reached for the towel beside the bed and found the red veil instead, folded, pressed, waiting on his nightstand. He didn't remember bringing it back from the altar, but there it was, and pinned to it, a note, written in an unfamiliar hand with ink that bled like fresh blood. Today, you will see what was hidden. Outside, the sky was the color of ashes. The village was quiet, even for Săn Địa. Children were gone from the streets. Shrines were closed. The dogs no longer stood guard. The air had shifted. The elders knew today was the day. Dwi returned to the shrine, veil in hand.
The altar was untouched, but colder than before, as though the sun no longer touched that side of the house. He knelt, placed the veil on the altar, and closed his eyes. No prayer, no chant, just silence and memory. It hit like drowning, not a vision, a possession. His breath caught, his hands clenched, his chest tightened. And then, he wasn't in the house anymore. He was in the past. He stood in a field, bathed in sunset. Săn Địa, long before paved roads. Rice paddies stretched to the hills. He saw a girl, barefoot, laughing, hair tied with red ribbon. Tao Ning, young, alive. She chased dragonflies along the dikes until she was called home. The house she entered was grand, painted wood, gold plaques, a family crest, the Lu Phoenix. Inside, 3 elders, faces drawn, eyes sharp, and beside them, a boy, no older than 13, pale, sickly, already dying, her betrothed. She bowed, offered tea, smiled politely, but her hands trembled, and when her father signed the contract, she didn't speak. She bit her tongue, hard, until it bled. The vision shifted. The boy died weeks later, and Tao Ling was summoned for the wedding, but not to celebrate, to complete the pact. They dressed her in red, hands pulled the gown tight, forced the hairpiece in place. She cried silently, but they painted her face anyway, rouged her cheeks, drew red on her lips, and placed the comb in her hair. At dusk, they brought the coffin and forced her in, alive. A symbolic union, they said, an ancient rite. No harm, just ritual. But the lid closed, and no one opened it. She screamed, she clawed, she begged, but her voice was sealed in wood. No one heard her, or they chose not to. Her father wept, but bowed. The Lu family bowed back and walked away with the land. The vision burned. The coffin grew hotter. Her fingers bled as she scraped the inside. And then, darkness. Dwi gasped. He fell backward from the altar, coughing, choking, tears in his eyes. He had felt it, all of it, not as a story, but as truth, as pain buried in generations of silence. The shrine trembled, not from wind, but from her. She was near. The veil on the altar fluttered, and the candles lit themselves. Behind the flickering flames, the mirror no longer showed Dwi. It showed her, full, unveiled, her face pale and cracked like antique porcelain, but her eyes were human and broken. She spoke again, clearer this time. You wear their name, you carry their sin, and you are my groom. The comb appeared in his lap, not placed, not thrown, simply there, and now engraved with 2 names, Lu Dui, Tao Ling. He screamed, he threw it into the fire, but the fire died, and the comb remained, untouched, eternal. That night, he walked through the village like a ghost. No one stopped him. No one met his eyes. Only one person waited for him. Elder Bui, standing by the river, a lantern in hand,
the same red glow Dewey had seen the first night. He turned, met Dewey's eyes, and whispered, "She lifts the veil not to be seen, but to remind you you saw and did nothing."
The river waited. It had always waited. Beneath its still surface, stories flowed backward. Bones whispered, promises decayed, and vows, forgotten by the living, were kept by the dead. Tonight, the lantern floated once more, red, silent, guided not by current, but by will. Dewey stood at the edge of the water, barefoot, dressed in the ancestral robe left at his doorstep, folded neatly, pressed with care, lined with thread as red as blood. The villagers had said nothing, but they had watched. From behind cracked shutters, from temple thresholds, from doorways rimmed with salt and string. They knew what the final night meant, and they knew what would happen if it was refused again. He held the comb in both hands. Its weight felt heavier now, like it was filled with blood instead of bone. Her name still etched beside his, the carvings now glowing faintly, pulsing like two heartbeats, bound by something deeper than time. He had stopped trying to burn it, stopped trying to break it. It could not be destroyed. It could only be accepted. The moon hung low, veiled in a red haze, and as the lantern reached the shore, he saw her. She rose from the water without a sound, no splash, no ripple, as if the river parted for her, welcoming its bride. She wore no veil, only her ruined face, and in her eyes, not rage, not sorrow, but completion. She raised her hand, and he stepped forward. The comb passed from his hands to hers like a passing of breath. She bowed her head, and when she looked up again, he understood. This was never about revenge. It was about the vow. She turned and walked backward into the water, inviting him, calling him, not with words, but with memory. He followed, one step, then another. The water lapped at his ankles, his knees, his chest, until only his eyes remained above the surface. And then she kissed his forehead and pulled him under. There was no struggle, no thrashing, only silence and red. So much red. Not blood, not water, something older, something sacred. The binding. By morning, the river was calm again. The lantern was gone. The villagers emerged as the sky turned gray. No one spoke, no one cried. They knew. The curse had been fed, the pact upheld, the bride appeased, but the comb returned. It was found at the doorstep of the house, dry, warm, clean, and beside it, a single shoe, Dewey's, still damp. The midwife was the first to pick it up. She held it to her chest and whispered a prayer, but she knew, like all of them knew, it would be needed again, someday, because curses like this do not die. They rest and wait and remember. That night, back in the city, a childhood friend of Dewey's received a package, no return address. Inside, an wedding invitation. Elegant, black paper inked in gold. At the top, you are cordially invited to the union of Lu Dewey and Thao Ling. At the bottom, handwritten, the river has chosen,
"Please attend." The friend stared at it, confused, then turned the card over and froze, because taped to the back was a photograph. Old, faded, taken in Săn Địa. A bride in red, and standing beside her, Dewey. But his eyes were not his.
The invitation remained unopened for days. It sat on Huang's desk in the city, among utility bills, flyers, and half-written notes. There was no return address, no postage stamp, just the envelope, pitch black and sealed with crimson wax bearing a symbol he didn't recognize. A phoenix, scratched through with a comb. At first, he assumed it was a prank. Dewey had always been dramatic, eccentric, fond of the strange and unexplainable. But he hadn't answered any texts in weeks. The last message Huang received was brief, one sentence. "If you get something in the mail, don't come." But he had, and curiosity, as always, bloomed like mold. He finally opened the envelope. Inside, the card shimmered faintly, as though dusted with ash. Gold script curved elegantly over black parchment. "You are cordially invited to witness the sacred union of Lu Tui and Tao Ling. At the river's edge, where the promise was made, where the debt was sealed. Your presence is not required, but it is expected." There was no date, only a location and a photograph. He held it carefully. It was old, color-tinted, the kind you find in dusty lacquered albums. A bride in red, and beside her, Dewey. But it wasn't him, not entirely. The face looked like him, but the smile was wrong. Too wide, too still, and the eyes were empty, like something was sitting inside, looking out. He flipped the card again. This time another line had appeared, faint, written in what looked like water. He said yes. Huang dropped the card. A lights flickered, a cold draft slithered through the sealed windows, and he heard it, the soft, unmistakable sound of a comb's teeth dragging across a wooden table, even though he was alone. That night he dreamed of the river, but he had never been to Săn Địa, not really. He remembered Dewey describing it once, years ago, a village wrapped in silence, a banyan tree that nobody touched, a house that inhaled incense like breath. In the dream, he stood at the water's edge. The sky was moonless. The air hummed with something waiting, and floating toward him, a red lantern. Inside it, a comb, still warm, still wet, wrapped in a bridle knot. He awoke with scratches down his neck, thin, evenly spaced, like the marks of 5 long fingernails. His pillow smelled faintly of sandalwood and river silt, and on his windowsill, the comb. He didn't go to work that day, or the next. He didn't call Dewey again, didn't speak to anyone, didn't sleep, just watched the comb, waited for it to disappear. It didn't. Instead, it moved, every morning, a little closer to his bed. By the 7th day, the wedding robe had arrived, folded neatly in a red box. No name, no address, only a tag pinned to the collar, groom. And the moment he touched it, he heard her. Not loud, not angry, just there, breathing behind his ear.
whispering through the cotton, repeating the same word again and again. Waited, waited, waited. That night the dream returned, but this time he wasn't watching the river. He was standing in the house, the ancestral home. Though he had never seen it in life, he knew it. The walls groaned with memory. The altar glowed, and at its center, two names carved in bone, Lul Dui and Tao Ling, and beneath them, a third half-etched, his. He screamed himself awake, but it didn't matter, because the moment he opened his eyes, the veil was on his chest. Back in Săn Địa, the villagers carried on. The comb had vanished from the doorstep. The river was quiet. The tree was still. The house remained sealed, but the shrine had shifted, just slightly, enough for the midwife to know. She lit a new incense stick, bowed low, and whispered through tears, "Another one is being chosen." Because some stories don't end. They repeat, not as punishment, but as memory, bound not to reason, but to ritual, to silence, to names passed through blood like poison, and to brides buried before the altar, still waiting.